Oh, thank you for that rousing welcome. I feel better already. Pat and Bart talking before lunch reminded me of an anecdote. You know, when Pat was talking about, and he's getting this team of workers to define what it was they were doing, and they were like maintaining a central heating system, and he got them to be more concrete and yet more broader in their definition. They were providing a comfort system, and how that enabled them to redefine their role and give many more new products in, and really liberated them. But it reminded me of a story that's told about a very famous management guru who died in recent times. His name is Peter Drucker. And Peter Drucker famously was giving advice and tutoring to this particular company. And he asked him, you know, what is it? What is it? What is your purpose? You know, why do you exist? And the company chairman and the board were all in agreement that they existed to sell drills and drill bits. And Peter Drucker said, no, he said, you exist to sell holes. And once they realized they were in the business of selling holes, it just totally freed up their conception of their business. There are all kinds of applications for holes that you mightn't have thought about. So I'm only hoping, I'm not going to dig a hole here today. Anyway, the title of my talk is Work as Nutrition for Self-Development. I can honestly say I would never have chosen this title. It was foisted on me by Ivan. I was totally emotionally blackmailed into giving this talk. So if you're not happy with it, blame Ivan. Let's start with the actual words in the title. Work, nutrition, and self-development. Well, what's the meaning of work? Now, perhaps it's what you get paid for. Somebody, in fact, I think Farouk will explore this a little bit at the start of the conference. Is it what you get paid for? Is it something you enjoy doing? But I think perhaps universally, if we were to be deeply honest with ourselves, we think of work as something that we have to do that we'd rather not do. That sort of covers most of our definitions of work a lot of the time. And nutrition. Well, the nutrition for work clearly has been enunciated and made very clear for us by Pat and Bart's talk. It is about getting our emotional needs met. And I will look in the first part of my talk about how do we create a work environment that can stimulate and make available nutrition for self-development. And the second half of my talk will go into, in more depth, into the whole question of what is self-development? What is the self? What might be going on here? So starting with the work bit to begin with. Commonly, when we think of work, we tend to see workers as being in either the private enterprise or in public service. And I think it is important of those of us who might be working in public service. There's often, I think, a sort of looking down the nose attitude to business. And I think that that's incredibly wrong. And the reason being is we'd have no health system, we'd have no educational system, we'd have no transport system if it wasn't for the taxation of private enterprise. The whole of our culture and civilization exists because private enterprise generates the wealth that can be taxed to provide this level of civilization. Of course, it's a two-way system. Without the public service, we wouldn't have the educated workers to feed the factories and the other positions that are producing the wealth of this country. So it is a symbiotic relationship. But it is important, I think, to recognize that a thriving, healthy civilization needs business and is built upon successful business. Now, at this time in our culture, we're facing a series of crises. You know what those crises are. We're undergoing the biggest financial collapse, perhaps, certainly in our lifetime, and perhaps ever. A huge worldwide economic collapse. We're facing an energy shortage. The fossil fuels are running out. And this crisis is looming ever, ever nearer. We're facing an ecological crisis. More and more species are coming into distress. They're being wiped out. Our rainforests, which are the lungs of the planet, are being mowed down at an accelerating rate every day. So we're facing a huge ecological crisis. And we're facing the consequences of global warming, which is going to disrupt life and civilization and production for large parts of the world. For billions of people will have their livelihoods, their very survival threatened by global warming. Now, facing this range of crises, something has to be done. Now, the rule of nature is that when a species is facing a crisis, it either adapts or it dies. That's the stark reality. Adapt or die. The good news, though, comes from a commentator on evolution long before Charles Darwin, going back some 800 years. The great mystical poet and still the best-selling poet in the world, Rumi. Rumi made a profound statement about evolution, and he said, evolution happens because of necessity. If there is a necessity for something to emerge, for something new to be evolved, that is the climate, that is the circumstance that will generate it. So we should be optimistic that even though we're facing unparalleled crises at this time, we're also facing an unparalleled opportunity to evolve a solution to these crises that will actually advance the human species itself. And this new adaptation, when it happens, it's not going to be some new theory, some new mechanism to adapt capitalism, or some new monetary tool. It isn't going to be that. The adaptation that will save this planet and save the species is an adaptation in consciousness itself. Because we have to evolve a new type of consciousness. The human species, when it first evolved on this planet, was perhaps family-centered and maybe for a small number of people living in a group. That was the consciousness, and as far as it extended. And then over the millennia, that consciousness expanded into tribal consciousness and even into national consciousness. But we now need to evolve a new consciousness, a global consciousness. And it's only from that consciousness will the problems that we now have be solved. That consciousness will enable us to work for the survival of the whole. We will recognize when that consciousness is here in greater numbers and more potency, we will recognize that this entire planet is a single being. All the species are part of a single being. That we die or survive together. The old conflicts that we're facing really belong to the old consciousness. Because in the new consciousness, there will be no barriers of geography. The resources of the planet belong to the species and the planet, not to any country. In the new consciousness, there will be no barriers of race or ethnicity. We are the human species, one of many species on this planet. There will be no barriers of religion or ideology, because we're all one. So we will transcend these problems if we evolve the new consciousness that's required to save this planet. Now, it won't happen for everybody or at the same time, but when enough people evolve this new consciousness, things will change and change rapidly. We are a single organism, requiring a new level of consciousness. It is also true that business, capitalism, has to adapt or die. I mean, if you think about the last 20, 30, 40 years, all those banks and businesses employing thousands of experts telling them how economics should work. And they failed. We're in the biggest economic crisis ever faced. So the so-called experts are not experts. We need to be clear about that. They are not experts. They have failed us. In evolving this new consciousness, we've got to get rid of a couple of false gods. The first false god that has to go is the god of profit and the bottom line. And the second god that will have to go is the god of the free market. Now let me explain why that is so. The idea of the free market, which has been now imported into public services, has been one of the most disastrous ideas ever to be evolved in any culture. Because there's no such thing as a free market. This idea was taken by analogy from nature, where it was thought that nature competed, nature red in tooth and claw, nature competed, and the best species survived, the one that was best adapted. But that is not how nature works. an ecosystem, which is how nature works, which is a whole range of species, animal and plant, all interrelated and all working together for the good of the whole. It is not nature red in tooth and claw. Just to give you an example of how an ecosystem actually works, let me just tell you about what happened after the reintroduction of the grey wolf in 1995 into the Yellowstone Park in America. That was the dominant, the apex species, which had been taken out and annihilated. But they decided to bring the grey wolf back into this ecosystem. Let me just tell you what happened. After the reintroduction of the grey wolf in 1995, researchers noticed drastic changes occurring in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Elk, the primary prey of the grey wolf, became less abundant and changed their behavior. This freed riparian zones from constant grazing. The respite allowed willows, aspens, cottonwoods to grow, creating a habitat for beaver, moose, and scores of others. In addition to the effects on the prey species, the grey wolf's presence also affected the park's grizzly bear, which was on the point of extinction. The bears were able to feed off the leftover meat from the grey wolf's kills. And the bears emerging from hibernation, for example, would be starving, but they chose to scavenge off wolf kills after fasting for many months. They also ate the remains of wolf kills in the autumn to prepare for hibernation, and consequently were able to give birth to more young. As grizzly bears give birth during hibernation, a greater food supply may improve the mother's nutrition and increase the number of cubs. Dozens of other species, including eagles, ravens, magpies, coyotes, black bears, have been documented scavenging from wolf kills. Keystone species are apex predators within a functional group. So nature works through cooperation. There has to be an apex species in an ecosystem to keep all the other species in balance. And if we were to take an analogy from nature for the free market, the analogy is free markets have to be governed. They cannot be cut loose. They have to be governed and monitored by an apex species, which obviously is either going to be a country or some sort of system set up to govern it, to make sure that all the myriad relationships that need to be in balance are maintained in balance to have a healthy economic system. So one of the first ideas we have to dump is that idea of the free market. It was an absolutely black and white nominalization and utterly destructive without true understanding of what competition means. The idea that profit and the bottom line is a false god. You see, profit is necessary. No private enterprise can survive without profit. It's an absolutely essential ingredient. But it shouldn't be the be-all and the end-all. Profit is rather akin to oxygen to a living creature. Now, a living creature cannot survive without oxygen. But are you or I going to spend the rest of our lives obsessed by oxygen? We're not. It's very nice that it's there, and if it weren't there, we'd have to get a bit more obsessed about it. But there are other things in life to be concerned about as well. And it's the same way within companies that are run well and that are healthy places to work. Of course, there's profit there, and it's an essential ingredient. But there are other things that have to be attended to with equal vigilance and importance. There are a number of stakeholders, for example, in any business. Let's take a look at the stakeholders. There are investors. Investors are entitled to a return on their money. They're entitled to a fair return on their money, where that is, those investors are insurance companies paying the retired people through those investments or wherever those investments are coming from. Investors are entitled to a return on their money, a fair return. And it would be better still if those investors could see that this company was actually doing something worthwhile, and they could take a pride in the company in which they were invested in as being a healthy company doing some good for the whole of society. The workers, of course, are stakeholders. And the business must be concerned about the physical and the mental health of workers. The customers are stakeholders in the success of the business. And a business needs to be very concerned about its customers. And do we have a healthy relationship with our customers? And are we helping our customers get their needs met? As we've seen from the example of Yellowstone Park, our competitors are part of a healthy private enterprise system. We need competition so as to stimulate growth, stimulate the production of creativity, new products, to keep fitness in place. So we need healthy competition. And it's the job of the apex predator to make sure that there's healthy competition available. And then there's society itself. No organization, no company has got the right to rape the planet. No company has got the right to jeopardize the mental health of the species as a whole. They are answerable to society. All companies have to be answerable for what they do. They have got no right to jeopardize the well-being of society as a whole. So these are the stakeholders, and their needs have to be addressed in any healthy approach to creating the new form of capitalism or business enterprise that will be needed here in our future. Now, Bart and Pat talked about something called group intelligence, and it's something that we believe in a lot, group intelligence. It is possible for the group to be more intelligent than any of the individuals in the group at a particular point in time. I'm happy to report, as a member of the directorate of the Human Givens Institute, and we've got lots of directors, and when we have our meetings, quite often we succeed in producing group intelligence, and solutions emerge that were better than any individual were proposing at the outset. And that's quite a regular thing that happens in our board meetings. So we have to recognize what are the conditions that create group intelligence. Well, one thing that needs to happen is we need to encourage the expression of diverse views. It must be safe for people to contradict each other. It must be safe for people to have different viewpoints. Now, we're not talking about some of those old ideas from the 70s and 80s where everybody had brainstorming sessions and everybody could say what they liked and no criticism must be made. That type of activity produces what you would expect, rubbish. It isn't about not subjecting ideas to criticism. It is about there being a tolerance for diversity, a tolerance for diverse viewpoints, an encouragement of diverse viewpoints. And it's about the constructive criticism of those viewpoints. Workers have to be taught how to do constructive rather than personal criticism. And in a healthy organization, people can do constructive criticism and take it as well as give it. So we need an expression of diversities of views. It is out of such a practice that we get creativity and innovation. Steve Jobs, who was mentioned earlier this weekend, for all his many faults, and great virtues, I might add, was really, really big upon the necessity to create an environment that fostered creativity and innovation. And he made that absolutely paramount in Apple. And when he was having a new headquarters built for Apple, he overran all the architects and said, I want the toilets in the center of the building. And this was aesthetically attractive to the architects. But Jobs knew what he was doing because he said, plenty of space around the toilets and they have to be in the center of the building. Everybody has to go to the toilet sooner or later. People will meet up on the way in and on the way out of toilets. And they'll chat and talk and have informal talks together. And it's when people's guards are down and you're having an informal chat that you spark real creativity and innovation and new ideas. And information crosses from department to department. And he wanted to create that type of innovative culture by encouraging communication between the disparate parts of his organization. There has to be a no bullying rule in an emotionally healthy organization. This is sometimes referred to as the no asshole rule. There's even a famous book of that title, The No Asshole Rule. Because it's well shown now by research into organizations that if you allow a bully in an organization, they lower dramatically the productivity of the people they're in contact with. They lower their productivity. And it's not just the people who are being bullied. People who observe the bullying, their productivity goes down. And often, at a much higher rate, people who observe bullying leave those organizations before they become victims in turn. So an organization, if it's to be emotionally healthy and responsible, has to be very clear. No bullies wanted here. And there has to be an active anti-bullying policy. So how do you recognize an asshole? Well, there's basically two rules. One is, if you come away from a meeting with such a person and your mood is always down and cynical and disempowered, you've just had a conversation with a bully or an asshole. The other thing that you look out for is that they tend to pick upon people of lower status than themselves. They suck up the people of higher status and bully the people of lower status beneath them. And an emotionally healthy organisation should have a really clear policy. These people must reform or go. You cannot have a sustainable, healthy organisation if you tolerate bullying. Another thing that inhibits creativity, innovation, and emotional health in an organisation is hierarchies and status. Now, there has to be a certain amount of status and there has to be a certain amount of hierarchies. But in organisations that succeed, they actively diminish and try to bring down the amount of hierarchies there are. They try to reduce the amount of status symbols. For example, in many of the bigger companies in the world, the CEO earns 500 times the pay of the lowest paid worker, or the average paid worker for that matter, 500 times the salary. Those organisations are emotionally unhealthy places because research shows the bigger the disparity between the CEO's salary and the salary of ordinary workers, the lower the emotional health of the workforce. It's not the CEO shouldn't be paid more, but when it gets to 500 times the average worker's wage, it's a sick organisation. We also need to be aware of the research that shows that power corrupts. And even giving people a small extra bit of power, a person who might hitherto have been an emotionally sensitive person in the workforce, give them an extra little bit of power, changes their psychology. And research shows that people, with a little bit of extra power suddenly change in their attitude towards other people. They become more selfish in their attitude towards other workers. They start to presume that their needs are more important than their colleagues' needs. They override their colleagues' needs. If they're going to be a sit-down, say, around a table, they'll automatically take the best chair now. If there's food being served and there's a bit left over, 5 slices of cake and there's 4 people, they'll automatically assume they should have the 5th slice of cake because of their higher status. They'll talk across other workers when they're talking. They even are now observed to not even care about their personal hygiene. When they're eating, they allow the crumbs to fall down on their shirt, and they'll talk with their mouth full of food. All this sort of thing happens when people are given power. Power makes people selfish and caitextic. And we need to educate workers, if they're given power, that this is a risk factor. And we don't want these sort of behaviours. We want to have the same positive behaviours we've seen before here. As far as possible, we should jettison targets. They have been a disaster not only in the NHS but elsewhere. Because people become focused. John Seddon pointed out in his wonderful lecture here a couple of years ago. People become obsessed by the targets and finding ways to cheat them and to bring them about without actually doing the work. They actually do more harm. Of course, there has to be a certain amount of measurement in any healthy organisation, but we have to cease being obsessed by targets. We need to give people general guidelines as to what is expected of them. Give people initiative and responsibility. Now, there's something that there's a lot of excited talk about in company psychology departments. And it's something called extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. The extrinsic motivation is obviously money and status and power. But it is very clear that whilst these things are motivating to a degree, but more motivating still is if people are being stretched and challenged in their work, if they're forming good friendships and relationships in their work. These are the real hidden motivators to keep people in jobs. And of course, hopefully you now can see Edward Deasy pioneered that concept of intrinsic motivation, but hopefully every person in this room is seeing that what Edward Deasy was talking about really is needs. And what motivates people to do a good job and stay in their job is getting their emotional needs met. The need for control. We need to push decision-making down, 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 down as far as possible so that the worker at the coalface can make decisions and take initiative. And forget about targets. Give them the power to make decisions if we're going to have an emotionally healthy workforce. People need community, not just outside of work, but in work. Work should be a community where we can feel free to talk and chat to each other and be supportive of each other. I had occasion a little while ago to visit Pat, who was here earlier, in his office in Dublin. And he was kind enough to come down and meet me at the door of his office and show me through the main office to his private office. And as I walked through the main office with all these workers working there, the thing that most forcibly struck me was there was no sense of people jumping to attention. There was no sense of power and control management going on here. I saw people casually leaning against the wall, drinking their coffee, looking up, seeing Pat go by, but they didn't stir out of their relaxed posture. Nobody suddenly grabbed the phone and pretended to be having a conversation. These were people who felt safe and secure in their jobs. There was security for that workforce because they knew they were being evaluated upon delivering upon the agreed goals, not looking busy. Workers, of course, need to be challenged and stretched, and a proper HR department, a proper management structure will be doing regular reviews to find out is a particular worker being bored, or are they getting enough challenge now in the worker? How can we make them more challenged? And people need to have a pride in their work. And for that reason, people should be given proper jobs, not filing forms. As far as possible, people should be doing whole jobs with a beginning, a middle, and an end, so people can see what the job is and where it fits in. We also need to celebrate our successes. There needs to be rituals in a good company that celebrates when success is achieved and when it's acknowledged, to create the sense of community within the company. People need to be able to take a pride in what the company is producing. It is producing something of value to the community, and they can take a pride in that. Another thing I think that might be helpful is to understand what's called the process of mastery. In the type of culture we have today, it isn't widely appreciated amongst young people that mastery takes a huge amount of work. Whether it's mastery of business skills, mastery of sporting skills, it takes years and years of dedicated effort to become expert at anything. It is not something you can do quickly. And not more than that, it needs to be appreciated how the process of mastery actually works, what's involved in mastery. So, according to our aforementioned friend George Leonard, he was a martial arts teacher, but feels that these ideas apply just as much to all workforces. But he said he had observed in his trainings over the years that there were 3 types of people who took up sports, but you can find them in business just as easily. The first one is the dabblers. The second type is the obsessives. And the third type is the hackers. Now, any of you who have ever played golf will be familiar with the hacker. They are the bane of anybody who plays golf with even a moderate level of proficiency. The hacker is somebody who quite happily goes out there on that golf course, totally happy with the fact they're going to displace at least 3 tons of art during the course of the round. That there will be several swings for every time the shot makes contact with the ball, what they call air swings. But they don't count those, of course, and they're totting up. That's the hacker. And by and large, the hacker is happy. They have reached a moderate level of incompetency, and they're quite happy to spend the rest of their life at it. They're really there for the walk and for the company. So that's the hacker. The dabbler is a person who goes into a sport or a job, and they are enthusiasts. They go in there and they want instant success. They get all the gear, the best books, the best shiny knobs and everything, and they attack it with gusto. And of course, they make a bit of improvement. But they soon discover what everybody discovers if they are on a mastery path, which is you make a bit of improvement, and then you hit the plateau. And nothing gets better, not for a long, long time. Well, our dabblers are not going to wait a long, long time to get their buzz, so they're off to the next sport, they're off to the next company, they're off to the next job. They don't stay around long enough to learn mastery. And then you have the obsessives. The obsessives are people who come in very enthusiastic, whether it's to become a therapist. You'll always recognize them if they're going to training as a therapist. They're the people who hang around from the very first seminar, and they're always wanting to talk to the lecturers. They want to talk to the lecturers in their breaks. They buy every single book and every single CD on the table. And they devote huge amounts of time now to mastering. They are going to master. They are going to become a human givens therapist in 4 weeks, or it'll kill them. And they're at it 24/7, whatever it is, master. They're going to do it. The thing is, of course, that at first they make with that huge amount of concentration and effort, at first they do make rapid progress, but like everybody else then, they hit the plateau. The dreaded plateau, which you can stay on for a very long time. And when the obsessives hit the plateau, what do? They double their efforts. They triple their efforts. They forget about their family, their children, everything else. They just spend more and more money, more and more time out. They're damn well going to get up there, no matter what it takes, until they eventually burn out, of course. So we need to be aware that the process of mastery is the same for every skill. You apply, you learn, you practice, and you make some progress. And then what happens is you immediately fall backwards, because you don't hold on to the peak you reach. You fall backwards, and then for a long time, if you keep practicing, you stay at that level. In golf now, we're talking for anything up to 5 years to become moderately competent, unless you've got outstanding talent. So you stay, but if you keep practicing, and that's the key, keep learning. Don't be like the hackers who give up learning. You have to keep searching out knowledge, keep trying to find out what you're doing wrong, keep practicing, keep learning, and then you'll make another jump, and you'll fall down. But generally speaking, you won't fall back to the last plateau. You're a bit above it. And so on, this very gradual process of mastery, which will, in most cases, take years. And we've got to learn to love the plateau by stretching and challenging ourselves whilst we're on the plateau. So those are some outlines of the parameters, shall we say, that are involved in creating an emotionally healthy organization, which could then allow for self-development to take place. Self-development. There is a big word indeed, with big questions, such as, who am I? Why am I here? Where do I belong? Where am I headed for? Sorts of questions that sometimes only haunt us at 4 o'clock in the morning when we wake up with a pain in our chest. Otherwise, we can probably dodge them, by getting drunk, doing a bit of drugs, have another go trying to increase the bank balance or whatever. But they are big questions, and eventually they come to haunt many of us. To be able to answer that question, we have to be able to answer, who am I? Who is myself? I remember as a young man in Dublin, when I was 18 years old, I was incredibly fortunate to get a job in the ESB, which is the Electricity Supply Board in Dublin, which is a semi-state body, as it's called in Ireland, which was a pensionable job with guaranteed employment for the duration of your life, so to speak, and an above-average income. So my parents were thrilled when I was lucky enough to get this job. But unfortunately, I only stuck it for about 12 months, because it was really boring. You were filling in consumer numbers and energy things in little boxes and doing this. And I would find myself from time to time just straightening back in my chair, closing my eyes and going into a daydream that I was doing something wonderful. At which point, our martinet of a supervisor would march from his chair at the head of the room and approach me with his hands behind his back like this and say, stand at my desk and say, Griffin, the job is not so complicated that you need to think about it. But I did. I stuck it for the best part of a year. And I noticed that there was certain fringe benefits that my boss had. Once a month he got paid, and he disappeared for a half a day and came back pissed. But I started asking myself, is this enough of a fringe benefit to keep me here for the rest of my life? That maybe in 20 years from now I can go out once a month and get pissed. So I resigned from the ESB, much to the consternation of my parents. And I went home to them and announced that I had resigned this job that they had been doing all kinds of prayers and Good Fridays and rosaries for months that I would get. They were absolutely shocked and dismayed. And my father just looked at me. He said, why? why would you do such a thing? And I said, Dad, I want to find myself. And he said, the most percipient, most perspicacious words I've ever heard on this question, which was, he said to me, well, when you do, Joe, I hope you like yourself. And wow, was he right about that? Because I had a very romantic view. You know, I would go off to London and become a scientist or a writer, definitely somebody famous, or become successful at something or other. And I was going to go off and do something dramatic. Of course, I didn't think that finding myself would be owning up to all my own faults and deficiencies and incompetencies and all the rest of it, which is what courses engaged in, finding oneself. So I'm going to approach answering that question. Who am I? Who are you? Who are any of us? Well, I think when we think about it for any degree of concentration, it becomes clear to us that we are primarily a center of awareness. Center of awareness which has at times thoughts as content, feelings as content, actions as content. But underlying everything is I am aware. Because I'm never aware of myself not being aware, because that's a contradiction. So I am always aware, because I'm never not aware. So I am a center of awareness. And if I examine that sense of awareness, I'll notice quickly that it's bipolar. Yes, I am looking at you. So there's an I am, and there's you. So there's this bipolarity to awareness. There's a subjective element, which is I am, because it is my awareness. You have your own exclusive personal awareness. You know that. Everything you feel and look belongs to you. It's you who are having it. But there's always something you're aware of. So it's bipolar. There's a subjective element and there's an objective element. I am aware of something. So subjective and objective. Now at various times, the objective comes to the fore in that bipolarity, or the subjective comes to the fore. The objective comes to the fore when we're absolutely absorbed in something. So, for example, if we're eating an absolutely fabulous meal and we're hungry, we lose ourselves in the taste and the flavors of the meal. If we're making love and we're enjoying it, we lose ourselves in the act of love. If we see a beautiful sunset, we lose ourselves in the sunset. And that's the most rewarding part of that bipolarity. We like to lose ourselves. Indeed, we only come back to ourselves when we're unhappy. I am bored. I am in pain. I am hungry. So the subjective element comes to the fore when we are in distress, when our needs are not being met. And what we really want is to lose ourselves in the objective. So what is consciousness? Well, we know from the neuropsychology of the brain, studies done in the last 10 years, beyond any shadow of doubt, that consciousness arises from a pattern match between stimuli out there and a template in our brain. Indeed, 90% of any perception is internally generated, we now know. So there's an inner template, and it's being pattern matched to something that's coming in from out there. And when that pattern match fits, then we see the cup, we see the chair, we see our auntie, or whoever it might be. So consciousness arises from a pattern match between an inner template and an outer template. Objective consciousness arises from that. But it can't be just any old pattern match, because we're creating machines that do pattern matching all the time. And I doubt that any of us think that they generate consciousness. I mean, if you have an electric kettle and it gets to boiling point, it turns itself off. There's a pattern match to boiling in your kettle and turns itself off. That's a pattern match. But I doubt if anybody's thinking the kettle is jumping up and down saying, I am conscious, I'm 100 degrees hot. So, it must be something special about the patterns that can generate consciousness, the templates that generate consciousness. They can't be made of the ordinary stuff of matter, as you know. And for that reason, Ivan and I, in our theory of consciousness, have called the matter out of which these templates must be made relatons. They are mind molecules, things that have the capacity to be self-conscious. They are I am consciousness molecules. But they work and have a special relationship with matter, or physical matter. So if we were to go back, shall we say, to the origins of the Big Bang, when this universe came into being, and this Big Bang about 13.5 billion years ago or so, we're told, we would postulate that out of that Big Bang, two sorts of matter must have come. There must have been the objective matter that the hard stuff of this universe is made out of. And subjective matter must have been there as well, because it seems completely different to objective matter. So our notion is that there was two types of matter: relatons, which is subjective matter, and solitons, which we use to describe objective matter. And for every relaton, there's a soliton. Now, a soliton is a molecule of energy, and what energy wants to do is to push away in all directions. If an energy molecule, the basic molecule, can make a statement, it would be, I want to be alone. And the relaton says, no, 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 I want a relationship. And so when the solitons tore off in that Big Bang, the relatons tore after them, and so with every soliton went a relaton. But because it's in the nature of relatons to want to get together, to make patterns, so very quickly after the Big Bang, the relatons would have started to pull the solitons in together into the precursors of matter that we know today. Atoms and electrons and the various elements, etc., being pulled into patterns. Now, when you pull something into a pattern, you are constraining its energy. That's what a pattern is. You're constraining the energy. And because of that, you won't need as many relatons. If you got them all boxed into these relatons boxed into, shall we say, an electron. They're boxed in there. So we won't need as many relatons now, because all we've got to do is pattern match to this new electron. So relatons will be released. So every time pattern matches are made, relatons are released. Relatons, it's their nature to be in relationships, so they'll all join together. And they'll form a field of consciousness in their own right. So as the universe starts to evolve, with every pattern that evolves, relatons are released, which are forming a universal consciousness field. So the universe is evolving its own consciousness with every step in the evolutionary process. So there's a field of consciousness there that we would call the universal relaton field. So the I am is a given because it's never not there for us. We're never unconscious that we're aware of. So I am is a given, but the object consciousness that we experience is the result of a pattern match between inner and outer. We lose our self-consciousness when we become absorbed in an object, such as beauty, taste, sex. Okay. We've looked at the idea of relatons and solitons and the Big Bang and the universal relaton field. Now, briefly, the three biggest questions in physics and biology today are: what is the origin of energy? Where does energy come from? Where is nothing? And what is the origin of information? And physics says, well, maybe we can get an answer to the problem of where energy comes from, because possibly if all the energy in the universe were put together, positive and negative, maybe it would cancel each other out and make nothing. So that way we could explain how the universe came into being, because perhaps it comes from nothing because all the energies would cancel each other out. The problem with that is physicists have been trying for decades and they can't find nothing. They can find something they call the void, but every time they look into it, it's energy pumping into it all the time. They can't find a state of nothingness. It's a huge problem for physicists. They cannot find the so-called state of nothing. Where is it? It should be somewhere, but they can't find it. And the next problem is the origin of information. It is blindingly clear now to most open-minded physicists and biologists that the universe is so ordered that it could not have come about by chance in the time span available since the origin of the universe. So how do we explain the origin of information? Not a problem, of course, to a person who's got a religion. You can comfortably sit back and say, oh yeah, well, God created the world. But God, of course, is a nominalization. God is an abstraction. However sacred and precious the term might be to a person, it's still a nominalization, it's still an abstraction, and it doesn't really explain anything. So we have these problems. And again, it's recognized by most open-minded scientists that the answer to these problems, the idea that perhaps could provide an answer, is as likely to come from any other discipline as it is from physics or biology, because it's a new idea that's needed. Not technical skills. It's a new idea that could provide the paradigm for technical experiments to be set up. Well, the idea that we put forward in Godhead, as many of you know, is this, a very simple idea, is that when we look at how the brain works, we see energy coming into the brain and templates capturing the energy, setting off consciousness. So consciousness is about the capture of energy, patterns capturing energy. And then we said, what if we extended that to the universe as a whole? There's this energy, and there are these patterns we call relatons, And if they were to capture all the energy in the universe, what would happen? Well, we know that when a pattern match happens, we get I am conscious of what I'm seeing. But if all the energy was gone, because you're taking the totality out, the only thing that would be left would be I am. I am conscious. So if all the energy in the universe was captured by all the relatons in the universe, which are information molecules, if they were captured by it, you would have a state of perfect nothingness. And that state of perfect nothingness would also be supremely self-conscious. Because all that would be left, everything else would be gone. All that would be left is I am. Now we know the state of self-consciousness is not a happy one. It always wants a relationship. When we go back to the I am, we know we want to get lost in something. We want a relationship. And so it would be for this universal state. It would want a relationship. In the beautiful words of the Quran, God said, I was a hidden treasure and I wanted to be known. So this I am state would want a relationship. It would want to be known. So it will give birth to another big bang, which will still be nothing because it will be relatons and energy that will ultimately cancel each other out. So nothing will be a state that will be continually altering with something. Nothing is dynamic. That's why physicists can't find it. It's not a static state. It's a state that goes from an I am consciousness to a that consciousness, the object. I am that. That would be the ultimate state of this universe. So this then would need no need for some external agency called God, no mystery about the origins of information, because you have this beautiful, beautiful harmony. Nothing is made up of total information, restraining total energy, giving rise to nothing. So we don't need anything external to create it. It'll be intrinsic in the nature of nothingness to create a universe, and for that universe to continually be absorbed back into it over and over. This would be a state of, the universe would be a state of eternal reoccurrence, a state that will be forever young, because it's continually being reborn. Now I believe that all the great mystics, to be honest with you, be they Christian, Sufi, Muslim, or Hindu, the great mystics all had the direct experience of that state. And the people who come after them made religions to somehow make sense of what they said. But the actual creative state itself has been, and no doubt is being experienced many times in every generation in this universe. So then, total energy plus total information would give us the zero that physicists are stymied and can't find. So there's an eternal Big Bang, an oscillation between nothing and the universe. It's going on eternally. Now, I've been giving you a little formula that's appeared in the mystical literature, both Hindu and Sufi. And the one formula, they give three formulas. One is 1 equals 1, and that's pseudo-mysticism. Because that formula says the whole universe is one, we're all God. That is pseudo. That's not how it works. The second form is that of exoteric religions. They say God exists somehow in himself, of and beyond everything else, and God creates all these beings. So we got 1 plus n. Again, that explains nothing, because where does God come from? And they say the secret of the universe lies in the formula 1 multiplied by 1. So whoever can decode that will have the key to reality. I would argue that that is the oscillating universe. The 1 is the I am, but it's continually experiencing itself in a new state. Eternally and infinitely, the Big Bang is happening over and over and over and over again. So it's 1 multiplied by 1 is the oscillation of the universe. Now, I'll just tell you a little story that I think illustrates something about this. It's again from Rumi. Rumi says that there was once a country called Kharistan. And the amazing thing about this country was, whoever visited it, let's say a man visited, and he was heterosexual, he would come across the most extraordinary, beautiful woman. And he would be instantly infatuated by her. But the very next moment, he'd see another woman that was even more beautiful. And then he'd be infatuated by her. And the next moment, he'd see another woman, and she's more beautiful than that one. And then he's infatuated by her. And this is going on. And after a while, he just gets fed up of falling in love. Because every next one is more beautiful than the one that went before. So Rumi says, in that situation, the only thing the person can do in the end is to fall in love with the land that can produce such infinite beauty. And that, of course, is the state of I am that is eternally creating the universe over and over again in a new form. Now, given this idea then, if we were looking towards self-development, which is the purpose of going on that little exposition, this idea would suggest to us that any developmental program of the self based on detachment solely must be false. Any guru that says, you know, you've got to keep meditating for years and cut yourself off, it has to be a false path. Because the secret of the universe is that it's continual attachment and detachment. It's going back to I am, letting go of the previous manifestation of the universe completely so that the new manifestation can be born. The universe cannot be about detachment. It has to be as much about attachment as it is about detachment. So to be able to detach and attach to a larger context. So remember those beauties were getting prettier and prettier because each state is more beautiful than the next. So it's about being able to detach so that we can attach to a bigger state of consciousness, a bigger context. That's what self-development is being able to move beyond our own petty greeds, the needs of our family, the needs of our country, all the time moving beyond so we can attach to a bigger and bigger context. That's what self-development is. But how can we do that? Because we've all got our petty greeds and selfishnesses and all the rest of it. Well, for personal development and growth to take place, it is necessary to suffer. I'm sorry, but that's just the downright truth. You can't become a master of any sport or any activity without suffering. You can't become a good human givens therapist without suffering. Going over and over ideas again till you're really internalizing, practicing the skills, checking regard, never letting go of it, checking your information gathering skills, always learning, never stopping. That's suffering. And that's the basic necessity. We have to be prepared to suffer, to have an aspiration to continually grow. And we have to make sacrifices. We have to make a bonfire of our vanities, in the name of a famous novel. We have to sacrifice our egos and our petty vanities. And how can we do that? Give up our pride. I was talking to Pat there a few minutes ago, and he was talking about one of the biggest problems with businessmen is pride. It gets in the way of people being willing to learn, you see. Having the humility to learn, pride. But we have to be able to do that, sacrifice our vanities, if we are to be eternally learning and be a student. And so we have to work upon our greeds. We have to work upon our addictions. We have to work and clear out our motor memories, clear out our sub-threshold traumas, do our necessary rewinds if we need them. We've got to heal ourselves emotionally and psychologically. And we've got to be continually working to get our needs met, working to improve our relationships with our children, working to improve our relationships with our partner, working to improve our relationships with our patients and with our colleagues, continually stretching ourselves in all domains and with all needs. If we don't do that, what will happen is we'll end up in a bubble. And if I might be forgiven, I'll just give you a couple of examples of people I think who have in recent times been in such a bubble. Many of you will know and heard of the famous George Best, perhaps the most gifted soccer player of the last 100 years, naturally gifted soccer player. But you also know that he was destroyed by his addiction as a young man long before his full talent was expressed. So it's incredibly hard if you're gifted, and you don't get gifted without incredibly hard work as well. That's always a part of talent, hard work. But if you do get to the stage of being incredibly gifted and being outstanding, how do you detach from it? That is the problem, you see. How do you let go of the adoration and the ego in order to be able to reattach so that you can continually develop? It's a huge problem. How do you let go? And George Best went into a bubble and tried to use alcohol and the adoration of fans, etc., and didn't really learn an authentic method of detachment. And so the bubble burst and he died. In more recent times, arguably, perhaps one of the greatest, most gifted golfers we've ever seen, Tiger Woods. I was personally, as an enjoyer of golfing tournaments, whilst freely admitting I'm a hacker, I've been amazed how long Tiger Woods has gone on, to be honest with you, the level of genius that he's shown. But I expected the bubble to blow sooner than that, because In order to be able to maintain that level of intensity of success, you have to have a successful method of detaching yourself. You have to have some way of burning up the vanity of the egos. And the only way you can do that is by total commitment to getting your emotional needs met in balance. Being there for your wife, being there for your children, being there for your community, stretching and challenging yourself in all of these areas. And if you don't, you'll find some addiction to try and lose yourself in. We now know, of course, that's what happened to Tiger Woods. But with all these bubbles, when they burst, the person then loses access to their talent, and that's the tragedy of it. And the way back is long, slow, and painful, and it is by authentically reconnecting to getting your needs met. So needs must be met in sustainable and authentic ways if we are to continue our self-development. It's really important to have the right aspiration. If you don't aspire to a higher stage of development, you can never have it. The brain is an expectation-generating machine. If you haven't got expectations, you don't generate the pattern matches. So we have to aspire to a higher stage of development. But in this lies a paradox. In wanting to be a better person, in wanting to have a greater, richer consciousness, in wanting to grow as a human being, we are being selfish. We are being selfish. And the paradox has always and will always be resolved in only one way. And that way is service. By being willing to serve our community, by being willing to serve our patients, that, if you like, is the necessary compromise for the aspiration for self-development. If you don't have an ethic of service to balance our personal ambition, then we're just captured by greed. So we must have the right aspiration, and we must genuinely and authentically want to serve. Serve our community, serve our patients, serve our families. That's the price. Here's a quotation from the great Rumi. "You have a duty to perform," he says. "Do anything else, do any number of things. Occupy yourself fully. And yet, if you do not do this task, your time will have been wasted." It is my belief that if we can create healthy workplaces based upon the human givens principles, and if people engage sincerely with these ideas, the workplace will then provide the genuine nutrition for self-development. And that's my final thought for our chat this afternoon. Thank you all very much.
Okay, Joe, you started the talk by saying that we're in crisis, that everything's about to go tits up, basically, and we've got to, as a global community, presumably, change our consciousness. Mm-hmm. Now, how long is that going to take?
I think it could happen. It's not about, it doesn't mean that 7 billion people have to change their consciousness. If 1% of the population of this country changes consciousness, everything would change in this country.
So how long, though?
Well, it depends how hard you work at it. If everybody works at it and everybody gets more people doing it and thinking this way, it has to be a group effort. But I personally think it's utterly doable, and I think it could happen much more quickly than a lot of more skeptical people think.
Most evolutionary changes happen in sudden jumps. You can't necessarily predict exactly when that jump will happen, but jumps do happen.
I mean, I would be confident that if 100,000 people in this country really understood the organising ideas behind human givens, consciousness would change like that. You'd have a flippant consciousness.
Joe, it seems to be at the beginning of your presentation you were saying that the law of entropy is alive and well.
The law
of entropy is alive.
Well, yes, it is part of our universe for sure.
How dangerous do you think that is?
I think it's a challenge. It is a challenge. And as a species, we will rise to this challenge. I am confident that we will. I think we will rise to it. And this is our challenge. All these crises are coming together for a reason. That we make the jump. And responsibility that's required at this time.
I feel as though I just almost got it. I am consciousness bit there.
Oh gosh, I'm glad, because I'm still struggling with it.
I was really entranced there for a minute. Could you just briefly go over again how the I am and the I am that and the Holy Trinity and how that relates to each other?
Well, I think I'll leave the Trinity out for now. The state of nothingness, the state of absolute pure nothingness, if it's made up from, given the fact that physicists can't find it, this is as reasonable a postulate as any other hypothesis, that it's made up from a state of positive and negative energy, cancelling each other out. The positive energy is the relaton field that cancels out the negative field of energy, that's the soliton field. And in so doing, it provides a perfect pattern match. Pattern matches make consciousness happen. Normally, if I'm looking, say, at that clock and I pattern match to it, I'm aware I am seeing a clock because the clock is still sending energy to me, so I'm seeing it. But if I captured all the energy that constituted that clock would no longer exist and I wouldn't see it. There'd just be I am there looking in that direction. There'd be no clock there. So in this ultimate state, if all the energy is captured by all the information, there is no objective world present anymore. All we have is the smile on the face of the cat. In Alice in Wonderland, we have an I am state there momentarily. But as soon as an I am state comes into being, it is a state of some dissatisfaction. It wants connection. We know that ourselves in our own subjective experience. So as soon as we feel I am, we're feeling uncomfortable. We want something. We want to connect. We want a connection. We want a deeper relationship. So that then triggers the release of another explosion of relatons and solitons, keeping the universe going again. And then that all gets recaptured and goes back in. Now, the state of nothingness has to be everywhere, you see. If it wasn't everywhere, it would be something. So the state of nothingness has to exist inside every atom, inside every element in the universe, and it has to exist inside you. The absolute state that creates this universe has to be inside you. And what spiritual development is about is trying to find a pathway to it, taking down the barriers. And those barriers are the barriers of context, trapping ourselves in context, not letting ourselves see a bigger and bigger context.
We struggled over finding a name for the book, which we ended up calling Godhead, the Brain's Big Bang, because God is a normalization. You have to unpack a normalization. Godhead is a normalization. And it was only when we realized what Joe's been describing to you, how the universe actually works, that we can say, well, God is everything material. That God is the that, all of us and everything else that exists in the entire universe. The Godhead is the nothing state, which contains all knowledge, all information, all self-awareness, the universal awareness, I am. And that is kind of going back to old religious language, isn't it? Which is maybe a problem for how many copies of the book we sell. Because religion gets a bad press amongst intellectuals and sort of the media, the popular media. They're very cynical about religion. But what we have found by looking at the mystical literature from all different kinds of religions, and also from the writings of people who've had mystical experiences who wouldn't call themselves religious at all, that this pattern makes perfect sense. You can suddenly see this pattern in it about there is an oscillating universe going from everything to nothing and back again, but in an eternal moment. So the Big Bang is continually happening. And that, you know, I promise you, we are getting people like physicists interested in this conception of how things work. But again, you have to suffer to understand this. You can't just say, oh, Joe and Ivan say this must be it. That'd be ridiculous. It's taken us years and years and many years, decades in fact, to understand something. And 7 years to write that wretched book, which is not a wretched book, but I mean, it was an enormous amount of effort. And if you actually have to apply yourself, and I know the number of people here have read it several times, and you really have to do that. And that is suffering. Until pennies, until the
worst part of it is you're having to pay for it. But if I may come back on the third element, you're asking about the Trinity. The third element is the pattern match. I am that gives rise to a state of bliss, which is a state of compassionate love. And that's what the tree states. There's the I am, which is nothingness, pattern matching to the next emanation of the universe, taking it out of existence again, and that pattern match giving rise to a feeling, an emotion of bliss.
And part of this has come from, well, it has all come really from this whole conception of trying to understand how human beings work. And we all know that the human being is constantly, every cell in our body and our brain and our mind is making pattern matches. It's pattern matching all the time to everything. Not just to the traumas of life. You say, oh, they're pattern matching to something terrible that happened to them in the past or whatever. But little pattern matches. Pattern matches to the part of you that says you're thirsty or hungry, or that you like somebody or dislike somebody. There's lots of little pattern matches going on all day long, millions of them, at a cellular level as well as the macro level in our lives. So this pattern matching process, all we've done is expanded that insight. Well, I say all we've done, but I mean it's expanded that insight into the entire universe.
In other words, it's organic. So that is what I think is really kind of harmonious and beautiful about the ideas, is that they were there in incipient form from the very first in the concept of pattern matching. They're not an add-on afterwards. They are an unfoldment and a flowering of the concepts.
I'm confused. I hope I'm not the only person who's confused. I struggled with this at the last time, and I haven't suffered enough yet by reading the book. But in a moment, I'm going to suffer by buying it. You said almost, Joe, as a throwaway remark, you can't say that God started everything because A, that's a nominalisation, and B, where did God come from? So where did the relatons come from?
Well, see, that's the beauty of the idea.
I haven't
is that
got
nothing. If you have energy, if you think of energy, it's movement in all directions. And what information or knowledge does is it restrains energy. If you take for example, the steam engine. The steam engine drives a train. By capturing the energy of the steam and forcing it only to escape in one direction, the train moves. So knowledge restrains energy. That's what knowledge does. It restrains energy. And by making the leap to say, what if we restrained all energy, and if total knowledge took out total energy, what would you have? You'd have nothing. So nothing itself could actually contain all the information in the universe. It's a type of energy that cancels out all of the other type of energy. So nothing is not what we thought it was. Knowledge, it is full of knowledge, but is as a positive energy, taking out negative energy.
Thank you. I think I'm off to try and do a PhD at some point to understand this.
It's a funny thing, it's a funny idea
where
to
did
get
the
around
energy...
around. But knowledge takes away freedom, you see. That's the whole point. Knowledge takes away choice and freedom. If you're knowledgeable, you do not have the choices that somebody who's ignorant has. For example, if you want the fastest route back to London tonight, and you don't know it, you can go by a million different ways. You can go by route. But if you happen to know what the fastest route is, there's only one route available to you. So knowledge takes away freedom and choice. It restrains.
I've got that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm asking if we can have oblivion.
Well, in a way, when we're looking for oblivion, you see, when we want to go out and get drunk or take a drug experience or fall in love, we're looking for oblivion. But what we're really trying to do is we're trying to get away from our am state of consciousness to be in a relationship with objective consciousness. It is in us to be in love. It is in us to be in relationships. And we're unhappy when we're disconnected. And so the pursuer of oblivion is really trying to get away from self-consciousness, which is right. That is the nature of self-consciousness, to drive you into relationship. But if you do it in a healthy way, it won't be with drinks and drugs. It'll be because you're getting your emotion needs met by genuinely connecting with people and being of service.
Wondered if you could say a few words about how your ideas relate to the concept of time.
Oh, wow.
Well, we haven't got much time in which to do that.
There's two dimensions of time. There's absolute time, as in the eternally recurring universe, dying and being reborn moment by moment. That's a type of absolute time occurring in a never sacred moment of a now. And then there's a relative time, which we perceive. We perceive we're getting older and changes are happening and things are dying and things are being born. To some degree, that relative time is an illusion because we're actually going from one universe to another all the time. because the universe is continually being recreated. So our perception of relative time is time in that sense doesn't really exist. It is a perception of change, but it's not absolute.
And it's not everyone in the room will say, how can they say the time that the universe continually being recreated? But physicists know, and modern science has affirmed a million times, that every particle, every atom, the smallest particles are constantly at a quantum level are disappearing and reappearing, disappearing and reappearing. And what we're saying is that's happening in the entire universe all the time. And that when they reappear, they have to reappear to the next possible position for them to be in. So it's all about every possible universe, it suddenly manifests. And it switches on to the next possibility. And of course, us dying is the next possibility, you know, for us. And to have living creatures, which is the that, observing the I am, which is us, you can't do that without having this process of dying.
But what's sort of much more, that might also sound a bit depressing, what's much more encouraging...
Sorry, Joe.
What's much more encouraging is that the REM state is the gateway into the universal relaton field. And if we get group intelligence going, for example, and we get the egos out of the way, you'll actually find in meetings and things like that, people are connecting that universal relaton field and they're bringing back bits of knowledge. And one person might bring back one bit, another person might bring back another bit there, and you find that this process happens. You can even find it happening to yourself, or relatives of yours. I woke up one morning about a year ago, and I heard a voice, still in the REM state, and I heard a voice clearly saying to me, all spirituality is entanglement. And that makes perfect sense to me. Because in physics, entanglement is about relationships. Things being connected up. And all spirituality, the whole universe, is about a working out of all this network of relationships. It's a working out of
it. Joe, in relation to, you know, our own use of the human givens, what contribution might we make, you know, if we can introduce the human givens into organisations towards the next step in evolution?
I think that would be utterly wonderful if that were to happen, and I really think that's the next leap. We are impacting in mental health, and the research is getting done, and the papers will be published, and we will get them mentioned in NICE guidelines. That's going to happen. That process is underway. But the next process is the one of changing organisations, changing our schools, changing our social services departments, changing our GP surgeries, changing our businesses, so that they actually create group intelligence and diminish the creating of psychopathology. When that happens, this is a raising of taking strides towards the new level of consciousness that needs to come into being. For every person who just goes up a little bit in that direction, they're lifting the consciousness of the species. So every person you get who's more emotionally intact and behaving in a less selfish way in a company, you are raising the consciousness of the species. It is a necessary task. It's the next step that has to happen.
Could you help me resolve an apparent paradox in some of the things that I've heard today? Which is one side of the paradox is that the REM state is the portal to the relaton field. Mm-hmm. The other side of it is that we are context blind when we are in the REM state, when we're dreaming.
Yes. In the dream state, which is simply an acting out of suppressed emotion from earlier in the day, we are context blind in order to allow that pattern to happen, that acting out, the dream to take place. However, if we are sincerely asking questions and struggling over trying to understand things and challenging ourselves, that will feed back that will feed back into our imagination, into the REM state, and that sincerity will call down information from another level and make it available to you. There are many levels by which, within the REM state, as a conduit to the universal relaton field.
It is possible to develop a kind of perception that when you're in the REM state, you know you're in the REM state, and you start to learn from it. And mystics have talked about this since time immemorial, and I can absolutely assure you that's true, personal experience.
Is that sleep or trance?
Well, when you're in the REM state, and you can be in the REM state.
Kind of halfway between both, I'd say.
Yeah.
Could you say a bit more about what you said in the book about when you're learning, you're self-conscious? Because I have trouble with that, because I feel when I'm learning something, I'm very focused on an object and in it, so I don't understand that.
If you're not self-conscious, you can't be learning. A person who can do something perfectly doesn't think about it, they just do it. Knowledge is unconscious. If you know how to ride a bicycle, you just ride a bicycle. If you know how to hit the perfect golf stroke, you just hit it, you don't have to think about it. But when we're learning, we have to become self-conscious, and we have to monitor ourselves and what's going on and what should I be doing here, etc. So that state of self-consciousness is a state of inadequacy. It's a state of trying to learn a pattern. And when we practice it enough, the pattern will go unconscious, and then it'll actually be real knowledge. Real knowledge is a part of our being. We are our potential for relationships. That's what our being is, our potential for relationships. To what degree and complexity of relationship can we connect to? Whether it's a perfect golf stroke or kicking soccer, or whether it is a worker or whatever it might be. Our spiritual level of development is the relationships that we can connect to.
Thank you. I just wonder, you say in the beginning there's energy and there's information, knowledge. And I just wonder how much of that information is complete, or how much of it are we adding to the relational field? Is the relational field evolving and evolving?
Well, what mystics, what
was there in the first place?
Sorry, Jane. Great to see you here today, Jane. What mystics say is that there are cycles in the universe, and that there are relationships that have to be worked out. And when the relationships are worked out, this universe, as we know it, gets wrapped up, and a new universe comes into being with a new potential for relationships. So every moment is getting richer and richer and richer, but there's no end to the complexities of the relationships that can evolve.
Joe, and could another way of understanding this be that consciousness is perception? So instead of saying self-consciousness, could we say self-perception? This comes from when I'm working with people, I know that I need to keep doggedly working with them until their perception shifts. And when they have, they sometimes say, I see this now, because you're tapping into their imaginative capacity, their imagination. So
at that moment in time, they're in object consciousness. They're seeing something. They're seeing something. Self-consciousness is being. It's not something. It's not seeing. It's being. I am aware. It's a beingness. It's not a perception. It's a beingness. I am. You know you exist. It's a beingness. It's a different type of knowledge to perception. Then the object consciousness, when I see, I can see that. I understand that. That's like something separate from my being, but I'm connecting to it.
Is it then possible or useful to think of the I am consciousness as, because all the relatons are driven to always connect up and form relationships, that everything that we're doing as therapists or working with these ideas is moving away. The I am consciousness is an awareness of a lack, that there's another relationship that is better that could be made.
Yes.
And so I think we all sort of know it as therapists, that what we're doing is facilitating bigger relationships and better patterns in people's lives. We're giving them new metaphors, better things for things to be like. Yeah. And so the whole thing and the whole, as Des was saying about taking these ideas into business, what you're doing is helping people move away from that sense of some part of the pattern being missing, the I am awareness that we haven't got it all, towards... I can't go any further.
Doing therapy, we're always saying it is an educational activity. It's a specialist branch of education. And educate means to draw out of the person. But you can only draw out something if the pattern is there for them to attach. And that's what the therapist or a good teacher in a school or in an apprenticeship situation does, provides the pattern to draw the same pattern out from that person. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's what it's about, and that's education. So it's not us being clever and telling them or imposing at all. It's the skill of drawing out from them what's in them.
And you're right, Roz. Patients come in because they're too self-conscious.
Yeah, that's
their problem.
Yeah,
they want a path to lose themselves again.
Yeah, exactly.
They need a path to lose themselves again.
Them or draw the knowledge out of them so they can move away from the I am conscious state
that's it.
that they're
That's a
stuck
painful
in.
state to be in. They want to get away from
Exactly,
it.
yeah.
That's what they're
Yeah.
Hi. This is something I've heard some other people saying, so I thought I'd bring it up and see how you guys handle it. Some people...
Is this taking ownership for your talk, Miles?
Okay, it's crossed my mind as well as a possible risk. I think some people see the stuff in Godhead as being potentially undermining some of the more concrete work in the human givens field. I don't see it because I can see it as being on a continuum.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe you'd like to comment on that. You know, things like one person said to me, "Oh, I threw that book down when they kind of said about sterile reductionism. I got them fed up with them taking a pop at these scientists and all that." And I thought, well, if you can't understand why somebody'd want to take a pop at some of these people, then God help you. But, I just wondered if you'd like to comment on...
Yeah, I'd be happy to comment. I'd be happy to comment on that, Miles. When we published the Human Givens book more than a decade ago, there was a load of people who said to us, "Oh, we're really sorry you did that book. We've been coming to seminars and workshops, we were getting the skills, but now you put it all out there, people are going to hate Human Givens, they won't want it, etc." We've seen this weekend that Human Givens is transforming this country. The organizations, people, the most amazing things are happening. So there will be, and there will always be, people who hate what's positive and has the potential for good, and they will work against it. That is human nature. But we mustn't be intimidated. Now, there are people, of course, who will like a part of the pattern of the Human Givens. And Human Givens is a very broad church, if I may use that phrase. We invite them, and we are very welcome, and we're grateful to have them. And there is certainly a home for atheism and anything else they want to come and do Human Givens. We are more than happy to have them as part of this. And if they only want to go part way towards exploring the ideas, and if they think that these ideas in Godhead are complete rubbish, then I completely empathize with them and say, "You're in a good spot, friend. Please stay with us and keep using what you find of value in the Human Givens." There is absolute no requirement for a Human Givens therapist to take any seriousness to the ideas in Godhead. That is not a requirement. And we were very happy for people to be involved with Human Givens who want to say, "That's as far as I want to go." And we say, "Great, we're delighted to have you along with us." But we are not going to insult you, and if you choose to insult us, then that's your problem.
So this thing about self-consciousness, then, if you become self-conscious enough, you become very aware of yourself and the state you're in, and then if that's sufficient, you get enough pain.
Yeah.
Is that what creates this necessity that Rumi talks about, that you might just have to make a bigger connection to get rid of your pain? Is that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. When businesses fail, marriages break down, children die, these are all huge opportunities for growth, connecting to a deeper, richer context. And of course, that context will have to come out of huge emotional pain. But huge emotional pain is always an opportunity for self-development.
But, so you just suffer for years, or how do you know which way to go with the pain?
Sorry, could you say it again, Bart?
Do you just suffer for years, or how do you know what way to go with the pain?
You have to have a little faith.
I sound like my mother, Joe.
The universe works together. The universe works together. The universe is working towards the good of the all. And that, however difficult it is to see how our pain can be a part of that, it is part of a bigger pattern in which our pain makes sense. And if we can offer it up with an attitude of service and humility, then it will further our spiritual development.
Joe, Ivan. I've attended the Consciousness Weekend, recorded it on a hard drive and listened to it probably a dozen times since. And I've got a little extract I'd like to read you here. This was written in 1894. There's something more which we seek in things, over and above what is immediately given to us in them, splits our whole being into two parts. We become conscious of the antithesis to the world. We confront the world as independent beings. The universe appears to us in two opposite parts, I and world. We erect this barrier between ourselves and the world as soon as consciousness first dawns in us. But we never cease to feel that, in spite of all we belong to the world, that there is a connecting link between it and us. and that we are beings within and not without the universe. This feeling makes us strive to bridge over the antithesis, and in this bridging lies ultimately the whole spiritual striving of mankind. The history of our spiritual life is a continuing search for the unity between ourselves and the world. Religion, art and science follow one and all the same.
Beautiful, and absolutely right.
That was Rudolf Steiner.
Well, Rudolf Steiner was on the right track for sure. Beautiful thought. Thank you, Sean.
Right, looks like that's everyone's exhausted.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks for coming.